Kate is our wonderful speaker. Welcome. We're delighted to have you, the Executive Director of Delaware Wildlands. So take it away, Ms. Hackett.
Thanks, Jill. I am really happy to be with all of you tonight. There are lots of new people and new organizations I'm hearing about and learning about. So this is actually a treat for me to start to look beyond the boundaries of my own organization too. So many thanks to you, Jill, and also to you, Dee, for inviting me and having me here tonight. So I do have a presentation that I want to pull up, and I'm working on that right now. So just forgive me for one moment while I am getting this ready. All right. There we go. Great. So my name is Kate Hackett. I'm the Executive Director of Delaware Wildlands, and I have been with the organization for about 12 years now. And before that, I worked as the Director of Land Acquisition for the Nature Conservancy in Delaware. But I've worked in conservation most of my professional life. So different organizations, kind of different issues. But I have really enjoyed working at Delaware Wildlands. We're a nonprofit land trust. So basically what we do is we work with willing landowners, buy their properties or receive them as donations, and then restore them for wildlife habitat. And restoration of property can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes we work on wetlands restoration. Sometimes we work on reforestation. Sometimes we're trying to create meadows. So at different times in over the course of the history of the organization, but also in different geographies that we work in, restoration means a different thing. So tonight I actually thought I would focus most on forests and forestry in Delaware and talk a little bit about this. It's a focus of the organization right now because of the increasing development throughout the state, and also because of the increasing fragmentation of Delaware's forests. So this is a primary focus of the organization. I want to today just talk a little bit about who we are, give you a little bit of perspective and history on the organization. I'll mention some about forests and their importance, but this is a pretty educated audience on these topics, so we'll kind of just gloss through that. But I'll mention some about the trends in forestry in Delaware and on the Delmarva Peninsula, because I see forestry as one potential way that we can actually protect forests and open space. And it may sound a little counterintuitive, but I want to talk about that. And then walk you through a couple of our forest restoration projects right now. So Delaware Wildlands started in 1861, and we were really founders of the land conservation movement in Delaware. We are the oldest land trust working in the state of Delaware, and we have permanently protected over 31,800 acres of land throughout Delaware. 21,800 of those acres we currently and actively manage right now. So this makes us the largest nonprofit, non-government landowner in the state of Delaware. And those 10,000 acres difference there, we conveyed those 10,000 acres to the state of Delaware to be used largely as recreational properties, because our properties really are closed to the public. We do host various opportunities for the public to visit us, paddle trips or birding trips or volunteer opportunities, but the purpose of our acreage, and this is driven by our mission, is really to provide a refuge for wildlife. So we also have a strong commitment to the economic and environmental productivity of the land and maintaining some of our traditional land uses and the cultural component of those land uses. So on various properties, we do have active forestry, farming, and hunting on a number of our properties. So I like to just share this slide with everyone, even people who are from Delaware, because I like to show you the perspective of our organization. So when others think of Delaware, this is kind of what they think of, right? They think about Dogfish and our president and that iconic split of the interstates. But when we think about Delaware, this is what we think of. And all of these photos, and most of the photos taken in my presentation, are actually photos that are taken on our properties. So one of the reasons I see our work is so critically important is highlighted in this slide. And I've put the source of this slide across the top. It's called Visual Capitalist. And this is from an article where researchers analyzed population density and depicted this in a 3D model. So you can actually see these images for the entire globe. But this gives you a sense of Delaware and the Delmarva Peninsula, which is circled in yellow. So you can see why it's really important that we provide wildlife habitat and farming and food sources and opportunities to increase biodiversity, because without that, we would be like everywhere else and see all of this development around us. Quickly, where we began in 1961. And the founder of the organization was Ted Harvey, pictured here. And even then, he founded the organization due to concerns about increasing rates of development and land consumption. And he was really the driving force behind the organization at that time. And also pictured here is Tressum Pond, which is Delaware Wildlands' very first acquisition in Sussex County. And we conveyed it to the state of Delaware to be part of the Trap Pond State Park Complex. So where we really became more active in the environmental realm was later, when the organization worked in the 60s and the 70s to thwart the construction of Shell Oil. And Shell Oil had targeted this area in red here to develop a refinery. Like, this was at the time when there was a strong demand for interstate highway construction, and muscle cars were becoming a thing. So there was a strong interest at the federal level for expanding refineries and road infrastructure. But Ted Harvey really saw the value of our marshes and estuary system and the productivity of them. So he worked to acquire land within that red square, and eventually acquired enough land so that Shell Oil would never be able to get all the land it needed to build its refinery. And that really was kind of the beginning of the Delaware land and environmental movement, right? So all of this is starting to happen before the passage of the Clean Air Act, before the founding of EPA and the passage of the Clean Water Act. So when we get collectively on the call and our other colleagues, I think we really need to take pride in that we really worked in earnest as a small state to have really significant environmental impacts. So I just thought I would show you who we are today. We're a very small staff. This is my full staff, even though we own 21,800 acres of land. These are all of my staff members, and we can all fit in my Toyota Highlander. So that gives you a sense of how small we are, but what a big impact we have. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention, we have tons of partners. We've partnered with Newcastle County Council this past year on a really important acquisition that I'll talk about. But we also work with our hunters, our farmers, our trappers, other organizations, other federal and state governments, so that we can achieve our mission. And just to give you a quick highlight of kind of the work that we do.
Kate, I'm sorry, can I interrupt you? Kate, sorry.
Please.
Your sound sort of keeps coming in and out. I don't know if there's anything you can do about it, but so I'm not sure where your mic is, but maybe if there's anything you can do, it's sort of not consistent.
Okay, great. Okay. Thank you, Dee.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna just come really close to the mic, and hopefully that will help some. And if it doesn't, Dee, please do interrupt again and let me know.
All right, that sounds better so far.
Good, good. So this slide just highlights some of the work that we did last year and what we're seeing. If you're more interested in some of these projects, I will send you some newsletters. But right now, I want to just be aware of your time as well and move through some of this, so we can talk a little bit about forests. So we are really focused on forests because of the ecosystem services and benefits they provide. Really, compared to any other land cover, we get more bang for our buck from forests than other properties. So we are focused on reforesting properties throughout Delaware and protecting forest lands. Many of you will be interested to know that our forests actually improve public health. So I actually appreciated whoever said that they talk to their trees, because we found a University of Pennsylvania study that was conducted about 12 years ago, and it showed that a group of patients who were recovering from a particular surgery looked at those patients, and some of them were in a hospital room that overlooked a hardscape that had roads in it, or sidewalks, or parking garages, or buildings. And the other half of those in the study actually overlooked some type of natural area. So a forest, or parts of a river, or a park. And they found that those people who had a room that had a view of a natural area or green space actually were in the hospital 1 day less than those who did not have an opportunity to look at nature. And other things bear this out. There is a really great book called Nature Fix by Florence Williams that talks about the benefits of nature and what kind of type of, and how we can improve public health with nature. We also know that forests reduce our costs for public services, right? Our forests don't require any type of water treatment or water infrastructure or emergency services. And they increase the value of real estate because because everyone wants to live next to protected open space. So we know they increase the value of real estate. And finally, if we can support a sustainable forestry economy in Delaware and the Delmarva Peninsula, we can also provide opportunities for employment. So just a couple of quick stats. We've lost 70% of our original forest in the state of Delaware, and that trend is only continuing. Where our main office is, just outside of Middletown, we are experiencing dramatic growth. Southern Newcastle County and the Middletown area in particular grew 266% between 2000 and 2018. And we have a number of approved developments already. And I have outdated statistics for approved developments. You may have a better input and comments on that for me. And finally, we are having the greatest transfer of wealth to the next generation, including land assets. So these are all the things that we believe are affecting forests and forestry in Delaware. In addition, we have other things going against us and forests. We have the fact that the forestry industry has moved abroad, and that's caused a shutdown in our local mills. So even if one was inclined to protect their family land or open land through forestry, it can sometimes be difficult in the state of Delaware. So I want to move a little bit to a couple of specific projects that we're working on in Newcastle County. And these are all projects on our properties. You can see all the properties that we own to the left throughout the state. On that map, the properties depicted in green are the ones that we own and actively manage. And the ones that are depicted in blue are properties that we acquired, but then conveyed to the state of Delaware. So these green properties are highlighted again in this red circle. And we have got a tremendous amount of help in Newcastle County. So I just want to send a special shout out to our partners like Mount Cuba, the Delaware Ornithological Society, Newcastle County, the state of Delaware, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and more. We get a tremendous amount of outside help. And recently, we have been working to protect about 350 acres in and around Taylor's Bridge and Augustine Creek complex. So these properties have been a priority for us at the state level because you see they connect to lots of other protected lands. So in this map, all the lands that you see that are shaded in some way are protected. And if we can continue to protect these lands and restore them, then we're developing large swaths of habitat for wildlife. And this is not only a priority for us. These are priorities for organizations at the county, state, regional, and federal levels. And one thing that's been very exciting for us is that the Fortner Farm, which we partnered on with Newcastle County, and the Gatitis Farm are actually the site of Delaware's first confirmed resident population of sandhill cranes. So that's fun. If you ever hear them, they sound like flying dinosaurs. They're just kind of ridiculous. It's quite a spectacle, and we are planning to do an event this fall and invite members of the public, hopefully, to come experience some of this. These land acquisition projects connect our properties with other properties, and I recently received an analysis done by the state of Delaware, and once we acquired the Fortner Farm and the Gatitis Farm, we learned that we have created a swath of 23,000 acres of protected land, in part in southern Newcastle County. So we are really, really proud of that, and I'm grateful to our partners who helped us achieve that. One of the projects that we have been working on is a project at our Roberts Farm. So the Roberts Farm is outlined here in blue. It's about 1,250 acres that we acquired in partnership with Mount Cuba and the Conservation Fund. And as I mentioned, we're trying to look at our properties and start to reforest areas. And where that makes the most sense is to build on existing forest and connect it with other parts of forest. So you can see here, this is a close-up of the Roberts Farm. And what we're doing, or actually just recently did, was take this area here, circled in red, that is 17 acres, and we reforested that property. And now it connects to this part to the north and this part to the south, and this whole acreage that is connected is about 90 acres of wildlife habitat and forest in Newcastle County. And that sounds small, but it's bit by bit, right? We reforest 7 acres here. This section down here in the south, we're going to do in 2 years. That's another 35 acres that will connect us to another 70 acres. So bit by bit, we are working to reforest all of these properties and connect them to each other. We also want to make sure that we are doing that in a way that preserves the biodiversity of the area and also creates different age classes of trees so that we know if one particular species of trees is affected, like the ash tree by the emerald ash borer, then we have other species there. We also want to make sure that we have young trees and old trees. We also have recently learned, there's an interesting study by some researchers out of the University of Delaware looking at forest resilience. And I'm putting this up here, and I want to encourage you to take a look at this article because it is looking at the importance of forests and having different root depths. So moisture is available to forests at different depths, so that when we have droughty periods, our forests that have deeper roots are still able to access our groundwater resources that are located farther down. And let's see, also looking at, this helps us address climate and resiliency by making sure that we can account for water sources for the trees that we plant, but also make sure, again, we have different ages of trees that will be affected differently with changes in our climate. We are also looking at planting trees in different ways so that we can be more effective in our reforestation efforts. So for example, instead of using plastic tree tubes in our reforestation sites, we're actually starting to use fences so that we can exclude deer from our tree planting sites. So just kind of going back to this project in particular, this red area, we planted about 8,000 trees overall, 4,000 of them this fall and an additional 3,000 this spring. We had 186 volunteers, including some of you on the call. And, you know, I have to say that when I looked out over the field when we were planting 3,000 trees, I was a bit discouraged. I thought that's just a lot of trees, right? Even for a lot of volunteers, that's a lot of trees. And over the course of the entire day, we got them planted. And it was so heartening to see all the different people that showed up, young, old, Black, white, groups of teenagers, religious groups, really, really incredible community effort to do that. And after we had planted this tree, this reforestation site, my staff was actually very excited because there's a road that bisects this property. It's called Stave Landing Road. And this is a picture of that road, of Stave's Landing. They were going into the tree planting site and pulled over because they saw a box turtle. And our staff was so excited because it was just a wonderful articulation of the fact that we're creating forests so that different species can migrate from one forest patch to another. My screen seems to be frozen here. Just gonna try this one more time, see if I can get back to where we were. Okay, I am not able to advance on this, so I'm gonna do this manually one time and get us further down here. Sorry for this glitch. Okay. So this takes us to another tree planting project that we did at the beginning of the pandemic. And so this is the site of the Fortner farm that we were talking about recently. This is our Betts farm, and there's this little tiny patch of agricultural land that really was low productive, low yield ag land. And it didn't make sense to keep it in agriculture. So we surveyed the forest that was around it, what species were here to the west and what species were to the east, and then mimic that.
You just say that again slowly, because I think once again, I was having a hard time hearing you. I don't know about other people, but say that again.
Great, thanks, Jill. I appreciate that. So this is another reforestation project that we worked on. This is called Augustine Creek, and this is the Fortner property that we partnered on with Newcastle County. And the project itself was taking this very small agricultural field out of production and planting it in a suite of hardwood tree species. It was a low production field for the farmer, and we decided it would have more benefit as a forest. So we planted an additional 2,000 trees there. And I want to just take you through what that looks like now. So this is what it looked like before the tree planting. And then, unfortunately, we planned this tree planting as a celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and the pandemic hit, and we had to cancel all of our volunteers, but we couldn't cancel the 2,000 trees. So our friends and family planted 2,000 trees with us. My daughters say they'll never plant another tree for Delaware Wildlands now. But here's what it looks like now. And that is right after the planting. And we actually went back to monitor the survival rate of the trees. And we found 15 of these green frogs in and around our tree planting, which again is just a wonderful articulation of the success of what we are doing. So let's see, let me check the time here. I could go on forever. Let me just take you through a couple more slides. This is the Great Cypress Swamp, which is located in southwest Sussex County. We own about 10,800 acres here, and it's the largest forest and the largest freshwater wetland on the Delmarva Peninsula. And originally, it was a monoculture of pine trees. So the previous owner really envisioned it to have forestry, but really only had pine trees, which was, in terms of biodiversity, was not valuable, just like a cornfield is not very valuable in terms of biodiversity. So using sustainable forestry, we are going in and harvesting some of the pine trees out of the fields here, and we are planting hardwood species. Again, we're getting biodiversity and different age classes in the trees. And the idea is absolutely that we are cutting down trees in a sustainable way, selling them on the timber market, and using that money to fund the restoration of for the organization. So the project we're working on here is a complicated project. It is a wetland restoration and a forest restoration at the same time. So these areas are where we are planting hardwoods, and we're planting Atlantic white cedar here, and then allowing the rest of this to regenerate naturally. We're using locally sourced trees, again, trying to support the local economy and providing employment. And we just see incredible things. This is about an 80-acre restoration site. We cut down the trees in this area and are replanting. And at one point last year, my staff member counted 53 bald eagles in this one restoration site. And that's unusual, right? They are very territorial. So again, it's just a nice articulation of the work that we are doing. The fact that we got 53 bald eagles is a sign that there's plenty of habitat and plenty of food source there. So one of these small circles was planted with Atlantic white cedar. And when we started trying to do the resculpting for the wetlands restoration that preceded the tree planting, this is what we saw, just that incredibly rich, dark soil full of nutrients. It's very indicative of wetlands. And once we saw that, we knew that it would be a great wetland and a great forested wetland. So going further to the tree planting, my staff member came up with this idea. This is the tree planting site of Atlantic white cedar. And usually we plant in rows because it makes it easier to manage invasive species in between the planted trees. But then when you walk into a forest that's planted in rows, it's just not, I mean, it's so manufactured looking, right? So he said, well, why are we planting in rows? Let's plant in circles. And so he did this, he designed this, and each line is where trees are being planted in a circle. We can still mow in between them, but when you actually walk into this forest, you won't see a row of trees. It'll look like a natural forest. And then I really love this picture because when I saw this picture, I loved the circular tree planting, but the lines where we were planting the trees reminded me of the rings of a tree. So I thought that was actually pretty special. And I want to just show you a series of our properties so you can kind of see the magic that is happening in these wild areas. This is one site where we restored wetlands and are restoring forest. So you can start to see the seasonally inundated areas with water here. And we planted these areas, and we can see birds hunting here. This is at the Great Cypress Swamp. We did not expect this in this restoration site in Sussex County, the Great Cypress Swamp, but we are getting waterfowl utilizing this site as a stopover on their migration. And it's pretty unusual. We usually see box turtles feeding on plants, but they are omnivores. So this was kind of an interesting occurrence on one of our properties. But this takes the cake, actually, and this is actually a two-headed turtle. My staff member happened to see this at the Great Cypress Swamp and get a photo of it, and it's unusual because this turtle is probably about 10 years old, and two-headed turtles are uncommon anywhere, but it's very uncommon to have a two-headed turtle. So clearly, he gets to hide enough. I'm gonna skip that. And these are just some of the things that we have underway this year. We are protecting 65 acres of forested wetlands in Newcastle County this year. We are doing and designing a 75-acre restoration project in Newcastle County. That's supposed to say wetlands and forest there. And we're planting an additional 12,000 trees in Sussex County. So these are some ways that you can get to know and help us. We do have an event coming up next week on July 28th. We are doing a nighttime insect event where we will be identifying moths, and we're hoping to attract some Luna moths, actually, so people can appreciate some of the insect life and the nighttime on our properties. So with that, I just want to leave the presentation and kind of open it up to questions and discussions. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have a bazillion questions. I can't read the chat and listen at the same time. So folks who had questions, would you like to ask those of Kate, who had a question?
So I'm looking at the bottom of the chat, so I'll work from the bottom up. One question is about forest loss along our coastal areas due to salinization.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of research being done in Delaware and the Delmarva, and broader than that, about ghost forests. So we are losing all types of land covers to increasing salinization that's resulting from sea level rise and intensification of storms. Some of that is the overwash of our bay waters onto land. So for example, in intense storms where the bay waters reach farther west, when those storms recede, we still have pockets of saline waters that are being absorbed into soils that traditionally have only had fresh water. So we're starting to see the conversion of those areas to salt marsh. And with that, the die-off of some of our hardwood tree species. We are also seeing an intrusion of salt water into our groundwater supplies. That's happening across the Delmarva and also mostly in Kent County. So it's serious in Delaware. And even my most conservative farmers that I work with see this as an issue, recognize it as climate change because it's happening to them. So we're trying to work with them to identify alternative crops that they can use on their farmlands or alternative streams of revenue for them, while simultaneously acquiring land to the western side so that we can have marsh migration.
A follow-up question, and they do see that as a part of climate change. And are they willing to take larger actions with that as far as political actions?
Yeah, depending on the individual, but we have actually worked with a number of our farmers in Kent counties to do that because, you know, as I said, it affects their livelihood. And as soon as their livelihood is being affected, people become a lot more politically active. So I'm looking at another question about the impairment of water resources in Delaware. And one of the statistics I had on a slide is sadly that over 90%, over 90% of our waterways in Delaware are considered polluted for their designated uses. That's pretty alarming. You know, this doesn't even take into account the PFAS issues that we are having. What this means is the federal government categorizes all perennial waters as having a designated use, like swimming or fishing or boating. And in Delaware, 90% of our waterways do not meet their designated uses. So there's a huge push to work on water resources issues. And that's in part why we are working on reforestation, is to try to improve our water quality issues in the state.
Right, and somebody was asking about the moth night information.
Yes, so the moth night is going to happen on July 28th. So let me just look and see what, I believe that's a Thursday. Yes, so 1 week from Thursday. And if you will call our office, we can get you the details about that. So July 28th, and the phone number at my office is 302-378-2736. And I can just drop that in that phone number in the chat too, so that everyone has it.
Okay, and Charlie, you had a question? You want to ask that? Charlie says, where do we need more forests in Delaware, in the East Coast, in the US, in the world?
I mean, my answer is everywhere right now. You know, we are so far behind the 8 ball on addressing climate change, carbon sequestration, air pollution, water pollution, and we see reforestation and planting trees as the fastest way that we can address those issues. Now, obviously, we can't do everything, right? So we are going through and analyzing our properties to see where we have low yield farm fields and where we can connect forest patches. And so those two places are the places that we are starting to reforest properties because those are the easiest places for us. You know, we're also working on other things, like we're trying to get the state to utilize a certain amount of local wood in their construction projects. We're trying to figure out, is there a way to subsidize the forestry industry so more people will utilize forestry as a way to make income on their property instead of selling it for subdivisions. So those are some of the other things that we're working on kind of around that issue of forestry.
So is that a comparable kind of thing? I mean, you can make the same amount of money or a comparable amount of money doing forestry versus the quick fix of a development?
If you look at it over time, it actually is possible if we can create a series of mills on the Delmarva Peninsula. So one of the things we're looking at is trying to create a public-private partnership and create a mill that would go from property to property to property that would reduce the cost of cutting down trees. In large part, people don't want to pay those costs. And they see it as an easier just to sell for development. So again, kind of a complicated issue, but you know, one way to stop development is to try to get other ways for landowners to earn money off of their land. Right? That could be regenerative agriculture, could be birding tours, could be forestry. Yeah.
I'm just looking at this Dave Nuttall question. Take an active interest in preserving the Great Cedar Swamp or creating buffers to filter nutrient runoff, especially from poultry operations. And secondly, do greenways serve as effective wildlife corridors?
All right, I'm just
You
trying
want
to.
Question?
Which question is that, Jill? I want to make sure I catch all those points.
Wait a minute.
The Circle Swamp question's already been answered. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I
So-
see Judy asked about my tree nemesis. I hate Bartlett pears. Oh my goodness. Yes, so they are not non-native, but they're horribly invasive and lots of people love them. Driving down Route 1 in the spring, all you see are the white blossoms of Bartlett trees, pear trees, and it's like a cornfield, right? They provide no biodiversity. So a great alternative to that type of tree is a service berry. And they have
Can hear
a
you.
service berry.
Okay.
Service berries?
Service berry, yep. And they have a similar type of blossom to a Bartlett pear tree. So that's what we recommend.
Thank you.
All right, let me just go down here through the rest of these questions. Someone was asking, I think, are we planting herbaceous plants and shrubs? And we do that. We do that both for our meadow restoration projects, but also we plant herbaceous plants and shrubs among the trees that we plant as a way to keep invasive species out. So our idea is that we plant those species, they will shade out the invasive plants while our trees have an opportunity to grow. So absolutely we do. It also increases the biodiversity and the insect population.
I can throw you a question. I was glad to hear you say you aren't using the plastic tubes anymore, but I didn't hear what you said you replaced them with.
We are using, it's almost like a silt fencing, Dee. It's actually twice as high as silt fencing. And we put it in with rebar. So we are creating 1 acre fences. And inside the fence, we plant the trees that are susceptible to deer browse. And outside that fence, we plant older trees. So more mature trees that are less susceptible to deer overbrowse.
Linda, is Linda Walsh? You have to unmute. You seem to be talking. Can you unmute? Linda Walsh?
I thought I had lost you complete for a moment. Thank you for letting me unmute. I'd like to learn more about the fencing because I have a deer browse problem on my property. And last year I planted 7 new trees scattered around my yard. And if I put fencing and rebar and all that around around the wide areas around the tree, then I can't get in and weed them.
So you do have to leave an opening, Linda. And Linda, why don't you give me your phone number and I'll call you?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
302-584-6515.
Okay, great. I will have someone call you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. What other questions do you have?
Where do you get your trees?
My trees are very young. Most of them came from the Delaware Nature Society sale, and two of them came from Blue Waters, Baltimore, which has wonderful, inexpensive trees too. I don't know if you know that organization, but those were the sources of the trees. Two of them were sat on by deer and survived and are about half the size they would have been, which is about 2 feet now.
So they not only eat them, but they sit on them.
They want to rub on them more than eat them. They do nibble on them, but they want to get in. These are oaks and I think river oaks and river birches primarily that they like. And I have one other one that they like and have eaten on, but the name escapes me at the moment. But I'm trying to preserve these trees and figure out a way to do it. Keeping away the lawnmowers and people is another concern and another reason for fencing around them.
So Linda, I commend you for planting oak trees. They provide a food source for caterpillars, which yields some of the most insect biodiversity there is. And that's really important. It's Doug Tallamy's work.
I'm trying to do a little bit toward Doug Tallamy's program. Nature's Best Hope was studied by the Ollie Eco Team, and his backyard national park program, trying to link neighborhood properties and neighborhoods to give wildlife includes deer a start, is all worth doing. And the eco team at Ollie is worth belonging to.
Fabulous. Thank you for that. And I was also interested from Kate, where you buy huge numbers of trees. And let me just interrupt you. The question was Bradford pears and Bartlett pears. And they're both bad. Is that what you said?
Yes.
Both invasive species.
Bartlett pears exist and are bad too.
In this geography, yes.
Huh. You know, I saw her question, and let me, if I can keep talking for a minute. Am I okay?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
The concern when you see these huge numbers of Bradford pears growing along the road is what to do with them, and it's all probably private land, but we really need to have crews going out and chopping them down so they don't continue to proliferate. I mean, a lot of people were sold those saying they were sterile, and they thought they were, but a lot of them were not. And that's how this problem happened.
So Jill, you asked about our trees, and we order in such large numbers that we have to contract in advance for our tree planting projects. And locally, we work mostly with Octoraro in Pennsylvania, phenomenal great to work with. And then a smaller organization to the south called Shenandoah Habitats. So those are the two primary nurseries that we work with.
Interesting. And how many do you order in a batch? I mean, that's thousands, right?
Usually 10 or 15,000. Yeah.
Wow.
The unloading process is quite something. Getting 15,000 trees off the truck.
Wow, that's amazing.
Someone asked about the sandhill cranes and I wanted to follow up. They are not considered to be native here. We are not positive where they originated from. We think this population might be part of a population that was once present in New Jersey. We don't know. We're actually trying to get a team at the University of Delaware interested in doing some genetic study of these sandhill cranes so that we can understand more about them. But it started probably 7 years ago. I heard someone, actually it was a birder. We participated in the Christmas bird count to assess bird populations with volunteers. And a guy I know and trust as a great birder came back and said, I saw a sandhill crane. And I'm like, are you sure you were not high on eggnog, right? It was possible. And this spring we saw 18 sandhill cranes. So they're here and they're doing very well. So they're around for us all year long. We actually know that they nested this spring here on our properties.
Interesting. Interesting. You have other questions in the chat here? Oh, Sharon has a question. Unmute, my dear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Unmute.
You've just actually partially answered my question. Many of the people that are on this call, not me, but many of them were very helpful and instrumental in getting the actual legislature that went through so that we don't buy all these invasive, destructive plants. Know and love, and they're all over our yards. But we don't really know what are the wrong trees? What are the wrong trees other than what you just stated?
So there are a lot of bad ones. Actually,
well, just tell us the good ones then.
Well, so online, there is actually a really, really good resource that shows you pictures of kind of the bad actors and offers recommendations for good alternatives that are native. Let me look that up and I will send it to Jill and ask her to send it out to the group.
Okay, thank you. So
Yeah.
good plants, right?
Right.
So it's kind of like the straight shows, but talk a little bit more about the two-headed turtle. Does it have to eat for two, or is one head happy and the other head sad, like comedy and tragedy, or I guess they're critters that are born, but that it would live is kind of unusual. I mean, does it argue with itself?
It's a great question, right? And these are just some of the freaky things we see in nature over 21,800 acres. I mean, it's just a lovely mystery. Nature is just absolutely wonderful. We are seeing mink on our properties for the very first time. So just some incredible resurgence of species. We're documenting new bee species on our properties that have never been seen before in the state of Delaware. So, you give Mother Nature a little kick and she responds, right? I mean, sometimes we get all doom and gloom about these things, but There are really very positive things happening in restoration.
I just wanted to say that that's absolutely wonderful. I haven't seen a mink since I was a kid in the Poconos, believe it or not. And I thought they were pretty much extinct, you know, that you know, even the fur people have killed them off.
Right.
So that's really fascinating.
Yeah, and Delaware used to be home to the largest population of bobwhite quail on the East Coast. Right, and our population growth and our farming practices have destroyed habitat for these ground nesters. But actually, we're seeing them on our properties. I remember driving down the road, it was about 8 years ago, and I was sure I saw a covey of quail, but we hadn't heard them or seen them. And I kind of did that cartoon character, like, and so we started doing surveys for their calls, and we have coveys of quail on our property, and they are expanding. We're actually working with the state of Delaware right now to share management practices on their wildlife areas and our properties, so we create the land mass that we need to support bobwhite quail.
Wow.
I see someone is asking about black oaks versus black walnuts. I think it depends what you want, biodiversity or great nuts.
Well, it's not so much versus the black oaks that we have, and I'm sorry, I don't know which species it is within that whole group, are not growing well into maturity. They die young. And the black walnut just put down taproots almost too deep to dig them, and they seem to be just springing up like gangbusters, and they do produce a lot of nuts. So I just wondered if you have a view on either of them. And also, while I'm at it, what about how are the beaver populations doing, and is there any success in allowing them to go ahead and build dams, or is that a problem for people who, you know, take care of waterways?
Right. So about the oaks versus the walnuts. Walnuts on our properties, we don't love walnuts because they secrete some substances into the soil, which prevents other species from growing. So we tend not to plant them. We don't take them down. We just don't favor them as a species. I'm curious about the oaks. I don't, kind of depends what the conditions are where you are, but we are big fans of oaks because of how they contribute to the insect population. And then, Dave, you had one other question. I'm sorry.
I was just asking about beaver because, you know, we've seen some, and they're at the edge of the salt marsh. They've even been found squashed on some of the clover leaves down around Newark and 495. I've seen one or two down there, and a friend has mentioned seeing them a couple of years ago, but not since, along the Red Clay Creek. I wonder I mean, I know they're native. Would you encourage them? They grow to 6 feet. They put up dams. They create or add to flooding, and that might bother some homeowners along places like Naaman's Creek, which got channelized when I lived there in the 70s. So I don't know. What do you think about any of that?
Well, we have 21,800 acres of land without many neighbors. So it's pretty easy for us to accommodate beavers. And we like beavers for those reasons. I mean, we want to encourage those kinds of freshwater type or fresh wetland types of areas where we are. So we are happy to have beavers. But it's interesting, right? Since I was a kid, having a beaver dam when I was a kid was a bad thing. It was a no-no. But really, that's done a 180. If you can tolerate some of the flooding, it's actually they're really very good. what is interesting to me is we're seeing right now a drop in the population of beavers and also muskrats. So in about 3 years, our muskrat population has dwindled to a fraction of what it was. And I don't know why. And I'm concerned about that, right? Both beavers and muskrats. So it's just kind of something I keep putting out there and asking people because it's been a change. We don't exactly know what's going on there.
What are their predators?
That's a good thought, Jill. I mean, people do mention predators, right? So fox, eagles, coyotes, humans. We have snakeheads, which are an invasive fish in our properties. So I'm pretty sure they are taking some of our muskrat. So it could very well be a predator issue. We're also trying to look some at spraying of chemicals in various areas, whether that be for weed control or insect control or associated with ag lands. We're trying to look at all those things.
Can I ask a question about the sandhill cranes? My recollection is that there was a very famous early naturalist person who wrote a book, or there's a book or article that where he talks about sandhill cranes. Does anybody have knowledge of that? Well, at any rate, I think sandhill cranes are kind of a big deal because of a book or a person that may be talked about by Talamy in one of his books.
There are thousands of sandhill cranes in the West. It's just pretty unusual for them to be in the East.
Okay, talk a little bit about your funding sources.
Good idea.
Great point. So Delaware Wildlands, when I started 12 years ago, some people say it was a sleeping giant. At that time, I became the executive director, and now if I took another executive director position, I would have more questions to ask than I did 12 years ago. I see Michael smiling, right? Like you're all ears as you're starting your own nonprofit. When I took over Delaware Wildlands, we had 152 private donors, and that's it. No grant funding from the state, no grant funding from the feds, just 152 very generous people. So we've worked really hard to diversify our funding revenue and to expand our donors, our donor base. So most of our funding comes from people like you on this call, people who write us, a $50 or $100 check once a year and really just believe in the mission of the organization. I have increased the amount of grant funding that's coming into the organization. So right now in this political climate, there is oodles of money to plant trees, oodles of money. We can't plant trees fast enough right now to take advantage of all of the money. Most of that money does not come with the opportunity to hire staff members to plant a tree. So I'm trying to work on that a little bit with our funders.
Does that come with buying land? Is that just, I mean,
that's really just tree planting. Now, for our land acquisition, we have been very successful working with our county, state, and federal partners. It's harder to secure money for acquisition than for tree planting. But I alluded to a partnership with Newcastle County earlier, and really have a great story to tell. We both as organizations were looking at the Fortner farm, because of the value for a number of reasons for that property. Agricultural land preservation, water quality, protection of land areas around that, trying to, protect open space in areas and concentrate development in others. And once we learned of each other's interests, then working with the county, we were able to negotiate a project where the county actually purchased the right to develop that property. So that's embodied in a conservation easement, and we actually own the land. So anytime you own a piece of property, you own a suite of rights associated with that property. You have the right to develop it. You have the right to plant trees. You have the right to dig for natural resources. You have the right to restore for freshwater wetlands. You have this bundle of rights. And so basically, we went and purchased the property from the property owner, and the Newcastle County purchased the right to develop the property. And by that, we both achieved our goals. We both put money into the property, but neither one of us had to pay the full price of the property. And it was just a remarkable win for both of us. So for acquisitions, it happens that way sometimes. We often go to foundations for money for acquisitions. We do it a lot of different ways. We also devised the Sustainable Forestry Program as a way to increase our revenue and diversify our revenue streams.
Say a little bit about that, devise the sustainable forestry.
At our Great Cypress Swamp property in Sussex County, which is really all forest, it was really a pine plantation when we purchased it. So originally the property owner was just going to cut down the pine trees and sell them on the property. But what we're doing is we're going in and cutting some of the pine trees, not all of them, some of them. We're selling that on the market and using the proceeds to fund our restoration projects. Then we go back into those areas where we cut trees and we plant a suite of hardwood species in there. So we're increasing the species diversity there, generating revenue for the organization and creating more resilient forests all at the same time.
Really enjoyed your talk, Kate.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I really enjoyed it.
Kate, thank you. You're wonderful. I have, as many of us are Delaware residents, and it is just so exciting to see land preserved. And I think that we're in a constant battle between developers and open spacey kind of people. And I keep thinking that my 60s neighborhood was once an open space, so I have to kind of get my head wrapped around that. But thank you for all the work you do. And I have to say thank you to everybody here on this call who is in one way or another involved in helping to make a sustainable world. So we will send out a note with the recording and some of the links that we need. And Kate, keep up the good work.
Great.
You're
Thanks,
wonderful.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
night.